Hello, dear friends, and welcome back. There's an interesting law brought in Maimonides' book of Mishneh Torah, and he talks to us about the mitzvah that we tithe of our earnings and we donate to the poor, to charity. And he says that we derive this from this week's Torah portion, which tells us about Isaac having tremendous success. His fields yielded 100 times more than expected. And the commentaries wonder why the Torah tells us, why it's important for us to know, and why would he in general even count how much produce had grown to be able to compare to the subsequent year when it was 100 times that amount. And they say the reason for this was because he would give a tithe to charity. And so he needed to know how much grew in order to know how much to set aside for the poor and for charities. There are those who wonder why it is that we can't learn this instruction about tithing from an earlier command or an earlier behavior of Abraham. We read the story that Abraham comes back from being victorious at war. He comes back with a tremendous amount of spoils of that war. Vayiten lo ma'aser mikol, and he gives a tithe to the righteous king Melchizedek. And there the Torah is explicit. It tells us that he gave a tithe. Whereas in the case of Isaac, it's not explicit. We have to understand from the fact that he counted and how much he had last year and this year, and that the reason must have been because he was giving a tithe. And the Rebbe explains it this way. The number one, it's all a matter of context. And number two, when the Torah tells us an instruction, it's because it's also more relevant from the story of Isaac rather than Abraham. So here's the context. In the story of Abraham, he has tremendous success, miraculous success. The Torah talks to us about 5 kings who were being subjected and being controlled by 4 much stronger kings, and they finally decided to rebel. And in the process of the war, Abraham's nephew gets captured, and Abraham hears about this, and he goes to fight these 4 mighty nations. And he succeeds. He overpowers them. And now he's coming back with all the spoils, and it's at that point that he gives a tithe of everything that he's gained. So this is a miraculous story. The story of Isaac, however, is just the opposite. In fact, nothing seems to be working out for him. He has to leave the place he's living, which was in Hebron, because there's a famine. And he travels to a place called Gerar, which is approximately in the Gaza area. And there he starts all over again. And there's issues with the king of Gerar. There are issues that the people of Gerar had closed up the wells that his father had undug. This was their source of sustenance. So things were not going well for Isaac, and he only grew a small amount, and yet he gave a tithe. Because of that, he was blessed, that he gained 100 times the amount the following year. This, of course, has clear relevance. You and I might think we don't need to tithe, or we only need to tithe if things are going amazingly well. But on the everyday, no, we shouldn't need to. And that's why Maimonides tells us that we learn this mitzvah of giving a tithe, particularly from Isaac. Thank you, and have a Shabbat Shalom.